Hi, my name's Teddy Carr, 47 years old, and this is my story. I was born and raised in Tillamook County, city of Tillamook. It's about 5,000 people. I was the youngest of three kids. My brother is 2.5 years older than me, and my sister would have been 5 years older than me, and she passed away at a week old. So, growing up, we had a pretty good childhood. You know, it was, my mom and dad both drank. They can tell you if they're alcoholic or not. I can't tell you that, but I believe they are or were. But growing up, I mean, in Tillamook, we lived in a good neighborhood. We ran around with a bunch of friends around the neighborhood. We'd come home when the street lights came on. It's a lot different back then. This was in the 80s. So, yeah, it was a good neighborhood that we grew up in. Had a lot of good friends. I still talk to quite a few of them. A lot of them have passed away. Yeah, we'd go to the YMCA. That was one of my fondest memories, was going to the YMCA. It was the baseball field. We spent a lot of time there as kids. You know, it was, my parents put us in a lot of sports, and I know why now. I have kids myself. Me and my brother are very hyper. My kids are very hyper. So we try to keep them entertained, and that's what my parents were doing, you know. Yeah, it was, I'll skip forward, you know, it's like elementary school was normal. Junior high was normal, got good grades. I was on honor roll. And April 18th of 1994, my life changed forever. I was in an accident, motor vehicle accident with my friend Ryan Hatfield. I was driving, going up to watch helicopter logging up the Trask River. The Trask River has a lot to do with my story too. You know, we're driving to go watch helicopter logging. His stepdad was working up there, and I had just gotten insurance on my vehicle. It was a Monday. We had an in-service day at school. So about lunchtime, I went over to my mom's office at Farmers Insurance in Tillamook, and I got my insurance card. I had to get a good student driver discount to be able to drive. So I was working my ass off to get a 3.0, and I did. You know, it was one thing that I really wanted to do was be able to drive, and you know, my parents wanted us to have good grades before we got insurance. They would pay for our insurance if we got a 3.0, which was a good driver discount. So I did that, and so we took off, and we were driving up the Trask River, and about 4.5 mile marker, we're listening to Metallica. My dad put a sound system in my truck that I'd bought for them. It was 1979 Chevy Love, 4-wheel drive, and I bought it from my parents. And at the 4.5 mile marker, I realized I was going way too fast, so I downshifted and I came around the corner and I rolled my truck. And I remember vividly coming around the corner and going in the ditch and rolling, and it was like slow motion. The window shattered, and that was the last thing I remember until I got out of the truck and didn't realize what happened. And when I got out, I said a couple cuss words. I kicked my truck, went over to the other side, and I saw Ryan. And by that time, the lady, Mrs. Schmitz, they have a cedar shake farm or mill on the corner there, and she had watched the whole thing happen. And she was on 911 before we hit the ground, basically. So 911 got called. I went over, checked on Ryan. He said he couldn't feel anything. And his arm was down like this. I was like, dude, he just got a broken collarbone. And we were both taken to Tillman County Hospital, and there was a curtain in between us. And they had me in a stretcher, strapped down. And I'm glad they had me strapped down, because the words that came out of the mouth of the nurse completely broke me. She said that he is paralyzed from the neck down. And that's when I get goosebumps right now. That's when my life changed. You know, it was an accident. I was completely sober, inexperienced driver, going way too fast up a windy road. And today I know that. But back then, at 16 years old, my brain blamed myself for it. Everybody else kept telling me it was an accident. And, you know, at 16 years old, and you're the one driving, I blame myself. You know, poor me. And I should have, you know, I took care of Ryan a lot. You know, I felt that was my duty, was to help him and be a good friend. It was my best friend, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help him. You know, there's a lot of stuff that happened, you know, like having to change his catheter, suppositories, stuff like that. You know, he couldn't have bowel movements on his own. So you'd have to help him. And at 16 years old, you know, I was just doing what I thought I needed to do, you know, and I'm glad I did that. You know, looking back, I'm very glad I could be of service in that facet of what was going on. But that's when I started drinking more. That's when I started smoking pot. Shortly after that, it escalated to other hard stuff. I don't need to go down the list of drugs. There's just a lot of them. And I know now I was just trying to hide my emotions, like push them down as far as I could so I didn't have to feel them. You know, I was feeling sorry for myself, self-pity. Self-pity kept me loaded for a long, long time. And, you know, I was a sophomore in high school. My grades went downhill real fast. And I basically, from that point, I knew I was in trouble, but I didn't know what to do about it. And I just kept drinking and doing whatever else was available. You know, there's a guy back home that he says he's addicted to more. And I believe that's true for myself. Like, more of anything. You know, right now it's golf. And I love golfing. And I don't get to do it enough, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. And so I graduated high school. I don't know how. You know, it was really dark days. You know, my brother had taken off to live down in Las Vegas and start his plumbing career. And looking back, I lost my role model, the person I looked up to, my best friend, basically. You know, and I didn't realize how much I missed him until later in life. You know, it was, looking back, it was like, yeah, there was a big void in my life. You know, it was just me at home. And, you know, I graduated high school and I was like, okay, I'm going to work. and I got a job building steel buildings. And the first job I had was for WSI, and they were working out of Portland. So the day that I got released from school, my dad dropped me off in Vancouver, and that's when some really hard drugs started coming into play. I discovered crack cocaine. If you are ever offered crack, do not do it. It is one drug that will not let you go. It is by far the most addictive drug that I've ever done. Like the first hit I took, I was like, oh wow, like I want more of that. That is awesome, and it took me to the point, I'm 6'3", and I was down to, my lowest weight was 106. And I remember being on the roof, and my boss was like, you look like shit. And I was like, I look good. And that's just, I'm 180 pounds right now, and I'm skinny, minus 75 pounds, that's knocking on death's door, basically. I needed a cheeseburger or two, for sure. But all my money went to crack, all of it. We were getting paid per diem, and we were getting motels, and I was like, I don't sleep, so why do I have a motel room? I'll just wander the streets. And that is insane thinking. So that's where my addiction takes me, being homeless, basically, and by choice, just so I could buy more crack. So I figured that was a problem, and I'll jump from one drug to the next, to the next, to the next. And booze is always there. It's readily available. You can just walk into the store. And I figured if alcohol wasn't available as much as it is, it'd be harder for me to drink, but I'd still find a way to do it. That's where my addiction, like, I will not stop, because that obsession of the mind does not quit. Once that obsession gets in your head, you are done. I crossed that line a long time ago. And, I continue to work. I'm going to therapy right now, and we're going through a timeline of grief. I told you one part of my grief story, but we basically went from April 18th of 94 up to present day. And basically from the time I graduated high school to the time I got sober, I was loaded 24/7, basically. And that's just to numb out anything and everything. So I didn't have to feel, I didn't want to be responsible for my own life. I didn't want to be, responsible for anything. I just wanted to get high and get loaded. That was it. And everybody said I was a great worker when I showed up. So I went through quite a few jobs. So in 1998, I was over at my friend's house, and over at my buddy Ryan's house, and it was his 21st birthday. And I proceeded to drink about a fifth of 100 proof vodka in a matter of probably half hour at tops. And I'd had enough, and I was just like, I'm done with this. I was feeling sorry for myself, getting irritated. So me and my buddy Dave took off, and I think we were going to my mom and dad's house. On the way, like, I just completely lost it. I don't know what got into me, but the mixture of pills and booze, escalate things real fast. And I was punching cars, kicking cars, and then there was like a tow behind trailer RV, and I'd headbutted it, and I headbutted it again, and my head went through a window, and I was like, and I felt something warm coming down my neck, and I was like, oh no, what happened? And I reached up and put my fingers that far into my neck. And I asked my buddy Dave, I was like, how bad is it? And he's like, oh my God. And I was like, don't do that. And I just grabbed myself like this, and we went to the hospital. I was They were going to life flight me to Emmanuel Hospital out in Portland. And it was snowing too hard for a helicopter to get over the mountain. So they thought it'd be bright to drive. And I was like, are you insane? I'm 3 sheets to the wind and all hopped up on morphine by this point. And I'm just like, you guys are going to drive over a mountain when it's just snowing. And it's not a good drive when it's dry out. So I remember the ride out there, just being completely embarrassed, of what I've done. I remember at the hospital, my dad came and looking up at him, and he's just covered in blood. And I was just like, man, like what I put my parents through, like early on, it's, yeah, it was just devastating. But they sewed me back up and I was okay. They said I was very, very lucky. I was a piece of paper away from cutting. They said I basically touched my jugular, but did not sever it. And they said if I'd severed it, I would have died. And a piece of paper, a millimeter away from death, and so that I swore off alcohol. My friends were coming up. I was like, don't offer me booze ever again. I'm done drinking. And a week later, I'm loaded, and I was taking a bunch of pain pills and stuff, and booze and pain pills is, when it says take 2 every 4 hours, I see take the whole bottle with a fifth of booze, that's what I do when I get loaded. It's insane thinking. So I'll fast forward to going to Vegas. Me and Josh decided to move to Vegas, and we're like, yeah, we'll just, we're going to go camp in Vegas. If you ever been to Vegas, there is no camping in Vegas, just FYI. Completely oblivious, and looking back, I wanted to be like my brother. He moved to Vegas, I wanted to, so that's what I did. And we got down there, and, that's when, if you're in Vegas, you drink. It's very, very cheap to get loaded down there. Very cheap. And I remember coming back to the motel. I started landscaping down there, and coming back to the motel and start looking around. And Josh was usually there when I got back from work. Started looking around, and it's like, where in the hell is he? I started looking around, and there's just my stuff in there. And there's a Dear Ted letter. Dear Ted. I'm like, you son of a bitch. Like, you bailed on me, and I'm stubborn, so I stuck it out. I stayed down there for roughly a year, and continued to get loaded every night, I remember going to Lee's Discount Liquor every day, getting a half gallon of Bacardi Dark. It was like $12.95, which is super cheap. And yeah, I'd had enough. I made quite a few phone calls to my parents to help pay my rent at the Budget Inn. And it wasn't a very high class place. I was the only white guy there, and there was a bunch of pimps and prostitutes. That was basically what I was living around. And I felt safe. It was weird. Like, they loved me. So I partied with them a lot. And, moved back to Tillamook, and then we decided to move down to Destin, Florida. And I remember it was getting sketchy again because the people we were hanging out with in Tillamook. And we're like, we got to get out of here before something bad happens. So we went to the library. We found a map of the United States. I closed my eyes and I pointed, and I said, wherever I point, we're going. And I pointed to the Gulf of Mexico, basically in Florida. So we started researching there. We came up with Destin, Florida. It was the top 10 beaches in the world. So it's like, oh, sweet. I'm good at getting jobs. So is Josh. We got down there. It was a 3.5 day Greyhound ride down there. It it was a long drive on a bus, you know. And we got down there, we got work, and continued to drink, and that's where I discovered actual cocaine. The stuff I'd been doing in Tillamook was, you know, stepped on I don't know how many times, but the stuff down in Florida was really, really good. So we were in Florida, and we were working, and it was, this one was still fun. You know, it was just drinking every night, working. Uh, I'd found a job at a 5-star restaurant. I was busting tables and making $300-400 a night for 4 hours work, and go out and party. And uh, rent was cheap, and we stayed down there for about a year, and the work had dried up a little bit. So our landlord suggested we get a hold of his nephew that did warehouse freezers. So we called him, and the next day we were on a Greyhound again to Indianapolis, Indiana. And so we started working there, and that's when I discovered the DTs. And we'd be at work, and they'd be like, "Teddy, what time is it?" And I was literally, you know, "Oh, it's about 2 o'clock." And then it'd be like, "Hey, what time is it?" And I'd just be shaking uncontrollably. Be like, "It's time to go." You know, it's right around quitting time, 4 o'clock. We go back, get drunk, stay out until close the bars down, and go back to work. You know, that's what we did. And I did that for a couple years, you know. And so I'm going to skip basically, because basically it's the same stuff just over and over and over again. You know, get a job, be okay, get fired, or I quit due to mainly booze. You know, it's, being hungover, not showing up, not wanting to go to work, feeling sorry for myself. So I'm going to skip forward to 2008. I moved to Bend. Or no, I moved to Bend in 2006. And I remember moving in with my goddaughters and their parents. And I'd start doing meth a lot. And my buddy Brandon was like, "Hey, you know, you got to go. You're starting to scare my kids." And so he brought me to the homeless shelter, the Bethlehem Inn in Bend. And it's funny now, but me and Brandon, you know, stay in contact, and we're still really good friends. And it's funny now. He's like, "Dude, it was like taking my dog to the pound or to the vet to get put down. You know, taking you to the homeless shelter. You know, that's what it felt like. It was like I felt so bad, but it had to happen. You know, and I totally understand. You know, and you know, I stayed at the homeless shelter for a while, and then I get a job, same thing, yada yada yada. And 2012, this good-looking girl contacted me on Facebook, and I ignored it. And then she texted me again, and I responded this time because I was single. And so we hooked up. I met her in Tillamook. Her name's Jacqueline, and I'm still with her. We got married last year. So things progressed really fast with me and her. I moved back down to the coast, moved to Rockaway, and moved in with her and her dad and stepmom. You know, and got a job, saved money, got our own place. And our first place was 50 feet from the liquor store door. We're right next door to the liquor store. Not a good move. We started drinking a lot, and things got really, really, really bad real fast. There was domestic violence, and I've went through the steps, and the best thing I can do is not do that anymore. There's a lot of stuff in my life, that the steps have taken care of, and a lot of it, is just not being a dirtbag. That's my living amends. It's not doing those same actions over and over and over again, and trying to be a better human being. So we ended up moving. We thought our house was the problem, and so we moved about, I don't know, roughly a mile away, and that's when it got really, really bad. And I ended up going to jail for harassment, which was domestic violence. I slapped Jacqueline. I went to jail, and I was court ordered to go to this domestic violence diversion program. So I went, and this is how insane I was. I was going to those meetings, which were at the Toma County Jail, and I would stop by the liquor store and pound a pint, buy some candy, usually Mike and Ike's, and I'd eat those before I get in there, and I'd eat them throughout the process of the class. And by the grace of God, I never got pulled over, thrown in jail, any of that. And there's one point that I did go to jail. I said I was done, and I went in to take a UA, and I couldn't go pee. I could not go pee for the life of me. And they said, you know what, you're just going to jail. So I stayed in jail for, can't remember how long it was. It was like a week or something. That was horrible. Like being cut off of booze, pills, like cold turkey. Detoxing in jail is not very fun. I would take other people's prescriptions just to, get by a little bit. And that was basically the only times that I was like not continuously loaded, was if I got locked up. But I'd still find a way to get loaded in there, just not as often. And so I had a restraining order, and I couldn't go up to the house I lived in, and I would sneak up there here and there. And I'm going to fast forward to December of 2015. I finally had enough, and I basically knew I wasn't good for Jacqueline. I knew I wasn't good for myself. I knew I wasn't good for this world. So I went on a bender, about a 2-week bender, and I woke up on Washington Street where Jacqueline, where my old house was, and I came to in a ditch, and I was like, I just want to kill myself. I was like, this is absolutely crazy. God, please take me, and I stumbled my way up to Jacqueline's house, and she said, she suggested that I go to rehab. So I started calling all these places. I didn't have insurance, and nobody would take me. And I came to the Salvation Army, and I called them. Haven Jones, intake specialist, answered the phone, and I said, when can I come in? And he was like, tomorrow. And I was like, whoa, like, no, like, this has got to be on my time. I'm reaching out for help, and then I'm saying no because it's got to be on my time. And Jacqueline wanted me to stay for Christmas. And so I stayed for Christmas. That was the worst Christmas I ever had. It was just terrible, like I wasn't allowed at her parents' house. My parents didn't want me around. Um, it was just horrible. It was just very, very depressing. And, in this time, I had some seizures from detoxing off booze. And those scared the living shit out of me. Come to find out, I should have went to the hospital. Uh, Alcohol can kill you from, quitting cold turkey. And I did not know that. I thought smoking weed and drinking Gatorade would be good, and so finally went to the Salvation Army on December 29th of 2015. My mom, my brother, Jacqueline brought me out there. On the way there, the only thing I could test positive for was marijuana, so me and my brother smoked about a quarter ounce from Tillamook to Portland. It's about an hour and a half drive. And I got there, and Haven met me at the door, and we sat down. He was laying out the program for me, and he was like, "Hey, this is 6 months, 6-month program." And I was like, "What? You did not tell me on this on the phone, or I wouldn't have came." He's like, "Well, there goes your ride." Okay, let's try this. So, December 30th of 2016 or 15 is my sobriety date. And I still have that sobriety date. That's one thing I'm not willing to let go of. That's why I'm sitting here talking to you guys. So at the Salvation Army, they make you strip down naked. They give you clothes to put on. So I was putting on another man's underwear, another man's socks, another man's, pants, shirt, and I was just completely devastated. I was just like, why would you do this to me? I had all my Christmas clothes on that Jacqueline had bought me, and they said, "You're donating those clothes." And I was like, okay, whatever, and so about a week, it was about 4 or 5 days in, I think it was. I was working on the clothing line. What do you know? Here comes my clothes. You got to be kidding me, like rubbing salt on an open wound. So, yeah, it was kind of ironic, God's doing things to me. I didn't think it was very funny at the time, but I know what it's for now. The Salvation Army told me that they were going to break me down to build me back up, and that's exactly what they did. I was on restriction for 30 days. I couldn't leave the property. And I understand why they do that. It's so you can remove yourself from anything outside, the outside world, so you can focus on yourself. I was able to write letters, and so I'd write Jacqueline all these letters, and she would send letters. She's still getting loaded at this point. The first day that I was let out was a Saturday, and Jacqueline came out to see me, and we went and ate, and then we went to the Target parking lot to have sex. And I can take you to that spot to this day, and I just chuckle now. Me and Jacqueline drive by there, and it's like, there it is, and I don't know, it's funny looking back at things. So Jacqueline got sober February 20th of 2016. I remember, I think it was February 18th she called me, or February 19th or something like that. And she was like, okay, I ran out of pills. I'm not doing pills anymore. And she went out and got drunk and woke up that next morning without pills. And she's like, I can't do this anymore. And I remember the conversation I had with her. She was like, I just get sick without doing pills. And I was like, that's what an addict is. I had learned a little bit of information from having, getting to go to meetings that were mandatory. You know, we were going to 12-step meetings in the Salvation Army, along with anger management, relapse prevention, and all this good stuff for a good foundation. And I was like, that's exactly what an addict is. So she went to her first meeting. Then she called me on the 25th of February. She was like, hey, I'm pregnant. I was like, holy shit. You know, I'm just a couple months sober, and it's just like, oh man. But I was excited. You know, it was I knew sobriety was what I wanted. You know, that was the thing that I was missing. And I was working these steps of the 12-step program, and I could see improvements in my life already. You know, I had a little sliver of hope, and that little sliver of hope just opened up a whole new world. You know, and I'm gonna fast forward to June, and or no, May 12th. May 12th is my brother's birthday. Me and Jack went out to Dabney State Park. We were playing on the river. It was nice and warm that day. And we went to the Olive Garden, and we're going to have dinner. And while we're sitting there, and she's like, I think I'm going to start to bleed. I was like, okay, go take care of it. And when she stood up, like she hemorrhaged, and I've not seen that much blood since my neck being cut. And I was like, holy cow, what the heck is this, you know? And so we loaded her up in the car. I took her to Providence on the east side in Portland. And the whole way there, I was like, there's no way this baby survived. No way. And come to find out, he survived. And I called the Salvation Army and told them what was going on, and they're like, well, if you're not back here by 10 p.m., you're kicked out, or you'll have to restart the program. And so I talked with Jacqueline. She was like, get your butt back there and come back and see me in the morning, you know. And because we both knew that sobriety is what we needed and what we wanted, you know. And so I came back to the hospital and saw her off to, you know, and she went back home. I went back to the Salvation Army. And so on June 7th, I'm working at the front desk at the Salvation Army and in the residence. And you're not supposed to answer the phone if it's a number that you recognize. And I saw her come up on the caller ID, and I was like, I just knew I had to answer that phone call. And I answered it. She was like, hey, I just delivered the baby and he didn't make it. You know, and I was just completely devastated. So I talked to Lieutenant Dave Kyle, and he told me, hey, I suggest you go take a nap, pray about it, and just know this, that if you do decide to leave, I'm going to call the authorities because you will have a warrant out for your arrest. I was on probation. So there's a little bit of motivation to stay. And so I did. I went back, I prayed. And all I wanted to do was go back and comfort Jacqueline, you know. And I knew if I did, I'd be looking over my shoulder until I got caught, you know. And I sat there and talked to Jacqueline about it, and we both decided it would be best that I stayed there. And I remember, like, 2 or 3 days later, I was able to go down to Tillamook, and bless these people's hearts. They're out of Lincoln City. I can't remember the company's name, but what they do is they do photos of people that have lost their child. and you can take photos with your child. So I was able to go and see my baby and hold him, and it was rough. I don't wish that on anybody. It's looking back, I do not know how I stay sober. It's just trusting in God, trusting in the process. It was, so we took pictures. We have the little thumb drive that they gave us. We don't look at it very often. We haven't looked at it in quite a while, and it's hard. It's actually last Friday night I was at home, and Jacqueline does this AA bunko thing, and so we were hosting the event, or she was, and so I had my kid, my two kids, and a couple other kids upstairs at our house. My son had our iPad. He was going through photos. He goes, "Dad, what's this?" And it was a photo of our baby, Trask. We named him Trask, and it's a hard conversation to have with your kids and his classmates. And I was just like, man, I didn't know what to say. It was like, that was our baby that didn't make it. That's your brother. And he's just really small, and he's purple, and had blood on him. But I was able to sit there and have a conversation with my kids and their friends, and tell them, basically, to have a kid, everything's got to go right. God makes it happen, and it just wasn't his time. But looking back, he did. I'll get to this later. I will. So we were able to take photos with him. Went back to the Salvation Army, and I graduated on June 29th, 2016. And that next day, so we went to Watt's funeral home in Tillamook and picked up the urn. Yeah. It's I told Jacqueline, I was like, we need to go to a meeting. And that's what I was taught. I was like, go to meetings, talk about it, be honest, be raw, and so we picked up the urn, and it was just another day that's really, really hard for us. It was not something we wanted to do, but now looking back, it's like we get to do these things. We can get through hard stuff, and we can do that sober. Like my whole life, I was running from emotions and feelings, and now God's putting all of it, right in front of me and Jacqueline, and we continue to stay sober, and that's all we did. It seemed like was go to meetings, work with our sponsors, and try to work a program to the best of our abilities. And I'd gotten a job right out of rehab. My buddy Josh got me a job doing sheet metal, and it was I had wasted decades. It seemed like, and so I had a fire under my butt to get things done. And I remember telling Jacqueline, I will pay you back every penny that I stole from you. And we still chuckle at this because she's like, "You are so full of crap. Like, there's no way you can pay me back." And here we are. You know, it's a crazy, crazy adventure. So continue to work, continue to go to meetings. We wanted to have another child. So on June 13th of 2017, we welcomed our baby boy Connor into the world. And, you know, as I'd held Trask and he was cold and no movement, obviously. And we had to be able to hold my little boy, and the feelings and emotions from that was like, oh my, like my life had changed in an instant, you know, and now I'm responsible for this little human being, completely like not ready for it, but I made it work. You know, it was I was ready, but I wasn't ready because there's nothing that can prepare you for parenthood. Nothing. I don't care what people say. There, it changes your life in an instant. And you know, as you know, I'm working, and I had switched jobs that made more money, and then I was offered a job in the union, and I ended up taking it. And I still work for that company to this day. And I remember sitting in the interview saying, you know, I want a truck, I want to be a foreman. And the guy that was interviewing me was like, that's kind of cocky. And I was like, no, I'm just confident in my ability. And 10 months later, I was a foreman and I had a truck, you know. And I remember, like, the day I got my truck, I was just like, you know, I've worked my butt off to get to this point, and I need to continue to do this and provide for my family. You know, that's what my life is now: is provide for Jacqueline, provide for Connor. And then we wanted another baby, so and she had a miscarriage at about 4 months, and I remember sitting in St. Vincent's while she was getting the DNC, and I was out in the waiting room and I fell asleep, and the doctor coming out after she performed the surgery on Jacqueline, and she came out, like, asked how I was doing. I was like, you don't have to do this, you could be going home. And she's like, hey, you're part of this too, you know, I know. And I was like, that is so special, you know, like, for somebody to go out of their way to see how I'm feeling, you know, because it happened to Jacqueline, but the doctor put it in a really good perspective. It's like, hey, you're involved in this too, you know, takes two to tango, so here you go. And so we talked for a while, and, you know, and I asked the lady, I was like, hey, if we decide to have another child, would you be the doctor? And she said, absolutely. So on August 12th of 2019, we had our baby, Cassius, and he's named after Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali changed his name. He switched the religions from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali. And I'm really big into boxing. He was my favorite fighter, you know. And I remember Jacqueline saying, we are not naming our kid Cassius. And I was like, well, let's bet. If it's a boy, I get to choose. If it's a girl, you get to choose. And I won the bet. So our boy's name is Cassius, and he's our little fighter. You know, he had kidney issues when he was born. They caught it in an ultrasound, and you know, it's God showing up again. Like this lady used to do ultrasounds on liver or on kidneys, and now she was doing ultrasounds on babies, and she knew what she was looking at. She's like, that is not normal, and it wasn't normal. He was born with 2 ureters on his kidney, and you're only supposed to have one. So we got through all that. It's completely normal now. We have to go back like every 5 years now to check on his kidney, and God puts people in our lives, and you have to be aware of those people. He put this doctor in our life, and this doctor's a stud. He's just awesome to work with, and had full trust in the guy. And he would put it in layman's terms, because I am not a doctor, and there's all these fancy names for it. It's like, basically, this, and this. And I was like, okay, I get that. And so he's like, he's going to be fine. He goes, God creates, he goes, the human body is really, really unique. He's like, so Teddy, you got 2 eyeballs, right? I'm like, yes. He's like, you can live without both of them, right? I'm like, yes. He's like, you have 2 testicles, right? You can live without those. He goes, you have 2 kidneys. You can live without them. You can live without both. There might be a struggle, but you can. It's like, your kid's going to be okay. And that put us at ease, We're still freaking out a little bit, but, as a parent. But just listening and trusting these professionals. And, it's I don't know, it's what me and Jacqueline do basically is we go to our 12-step program. We work with our sponsor, do the steps. I sponsor people. And this program has given me a design for living that I can take any problem in my life and apply it to the big book or whatever book you're looking at, and apply it to my life, and you get results. If there's a problem, there's a solution. And I don't like living in the problem. I like living in the solution. There's sometimes like I'm not willing to look at things for a while. Like my grief, and there's another big grief part coming up, and it was December 7th in 2019, and I get a text message, hey, I'm praying for you. So I call this guy, and it's like at 6:30 in the morning. I call this guy, and I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, you didn't hear it, did you? And it's like, no, that's why I'm calling you. What's going on? And it's like, well, your brother got stabbed last night, and he did not make it. So, again, I'm just devastated. And I'm like, I need to figure out what's going on. So I call the cops, and I finally found out it was him. And this is one thing that will stick with me the rest of my life is I was able to call my mom and dad and tell them that my brother's life had been taken. And sound of my mom's voice will never leave. But today I'm grateful that I was able to do that. My dad, same thing. I don't see my dad cry. Yeah, it was just that day was one of the hardest days of my life. Yeah. Again, I'd lost my brother. Back when I was 16, he moved to Vegas. I lost him. 2019, he's taken off the face of this earth. And, it's remember driving to my parents' house, and the first person I called was my sponsor, and his name's Joe. He's not my sponsor now, but that man listened to me. You know, it was like, I don't know what you're going through, but I will listen to you. And that's what I get in sobriety. Is I get people that'll listen to me, you know, and help me through things, you know. And you know, it's here's another thing put in front of me. It's like, the funny thing is that I didn't even think about getting loaded at all, you know, and that's what has been given to me by working these steps of the 12-step program. Is the obsession of the mind has been lifted, the allergy, the physical allergy was lifted, and it's from working these steps. You know, it's if you're going to a 12-step program and you're not doing the steps, then why are you going to meetings? Why? Like, to hang out? You know, your life is going to stay the way it is, like, if you don't work on things, you know, and that's why I continue to work on things. It's that's why I'm going to therapy, because I've done the steps around a person, my family, drugs and alcohol, and there's just something missing. So I saw Jacqueline going to therapy, and I was like, you know what? It's working for her. Why don't I start doing this around my grief? So I got on the internet, looked for grief counseling, and I found one, and I've been going, I can't tell you how long, probably the last 4 months or so, and I've seen progress. You know, I'm going through a timeline of all this stuff, and we're getting ready to go back through the timeline and read it and go in depth with it and tell my inner child that it's okay, you know, with my wreck with Ryan, and then my adult self with the baby, with Trav, with the other baby that we lost, with my brother, you know, things like that. And because I don't want to sit up here all day thinking about it, you know, and that gives me an outlet, you know, and it's been great, you know. It's so what I do today is I sponsor people. I have a sponsor. He knows he's my sponsor. I work the steps with my sponsees and my sponsor. I go to meetings. Like when I'm out of town, I'm in the Dalles right now. I'm from Hillsboro, or I live in Hillsboro. That's what I do. I go to meetings. You know, I'm sitting in the park with this wonderful gentleman, and he asked me if I would do this video, and I said, absolutely. This is what I get to give back, you know, because all I did in my addiction was take and take and take and take, you know. And I remember the amends with my mom, and you know, she's like, just stay sober. Like, none of that stuff matters anymore. Just stay sober. You're doing great. You're gonna give back to. You don't know how many people you've already helped, you know. And to hear my mom say that, and my mom used to look at me with disgust, and now when I see my mom, she just lights up, you know. And the relationship that I have with my parents is awesome. You know, it's I call them a lot. You know, I should call them every day. I don't. You know, sorry, Mom. And you know, it's the relationship she has with my boys. You know, it makes me cry, because she tells me that it's like raising you and your brother over again. Because Connor looks like a lot like my brother. He looks like me too, but Cassius looks just like me, and looking back at baby pictures and stuff, it's like, wow, as we grow older, I look back at me and my brother and look at my kids, and it's like, I get what my mom's saying. It's a beautiful thing, and I wouldn't have that if I wasn't sitting here right now. So I wouldn't. It's a it's a gift, and with relapse, uh, there, I say this in meetings a lot. They tell you to play the tape. My tape's super simple. It's drink, die. Because if I drink, I'm spiritually dead instantly. I'm going to be kicked out of my house. I'm going to lose my job. I'm just going to be bankrupt in every facet of my life. And I'm not willing to do that. I see people come in, they get their stuff back, they get in a relationship, they break up with this person, or they get broken up with, and they go back out. Sometimes they don't make it back. And that's what scares me, is if I went back out, would I make it back? And there's no reason to fix something that's not broken. My program is not broken. It's not perfect, but it's not broken. Like, I do work the program. And so I just continue to do this daily. I do a nightly inventory every night, and I send it to too many people. I overdo everything, but that's okay. I'm able to get vulnerable with all these different men in my life, and I send it to my aunt, my mom also. And this is what I get to do. And right now, what's going on right now is I'm advocating for my brother, and I'm trying to get some laws changed around the mental health system where this individual's at, and because he hasn't stood trial for what he did, and that's what I can do now, is try to change things to help better society. It's it's a trip. Looking back, it's like I was running from everything because I was a scared little boy that didn't want to talk about his feelings. That's basically it. I was so afraid to get honest with people on how I felt inside because I was completely broken, and it was my fault for doing this for so long, but now looking back, it's like I went through all this stuff to where I'm at now, and it was worth it. It's wonderful. It's me and Jacqueline just recently got tattoos, and I have one right here of a crow because I think my brother came back as a crow. And it's weird. Every job site I go to, there's a crow, and my boys see a crow and they're like, "Hey, there's Uncle Jeffrey." It's beautiful. It's a gift now. And looking back, the death of my son and the death of my brother now are an asset because I can help other people through things. And to take something so devastating and turn it into a positive, it's weird. To go through all this pain to help somebody else their pain, and it's worth it. I'm able to sit there and talk with people and tell them what to do, or suggest them, hey, this is what I do. And Jacqueline got a tattoo from here to here of the baby's urn. And that's just ways that we can give back. Our tattoo guy's a medium also, and he was telling us some weird stuff. I didn't know if I believed in woo-woo stuff, and now I do. It was made very, very clear that my brother's in my house, and that's okay, because once in a while I'll walk by my dresser and be like, "What's up, Jeffrey?" And walk by our little meditation room. "What's up, Jeffrey?" And you know, and Jocelyn was getting her tattoo, and she was on the table, and uh, she's like, I got a really weird energy. And I know I'm going to mess this up. I'm just paraphrasing, but basically, the tattoo guy was saying, hey, the reason why you're feeling this is because he's here with you. Get chills and goosebumps. And that's when I get goosebumps, I know God's right there. You know? And I'll tell a little short story. We took Trask's ashes and Jeffrey's ashes with us on the plane. And I told Jacqueline, I was like, we're going to dump these out the night of our wedding. And so it was me, Jacqueline, my friend that was friends with my brother, Ryan, and his wife, Amanda. We're all sitting on the pier overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. And I have the ashes, we're all talking. I didn't know it at the time, but Amanda was videoing this. And every time I look at that video, I get goosebumps because when I went to dump out his ashes, Trask's ashes, a big old flash of lightning. I was like, whoa, that was trippy, you know. And then I went to pour out Jeffrey's ashes, and as I'm pouring it out, boom, another flash of lightning. And I was like, yep, they're here. You know, they're here with us. You know, and that's God showing us, you know, hey, they're right here with you guys.